This is the CMO of Gaia-X, Vasilia Orfanou. This is our newest podcast series. Gaia-X is a newly aspiring, rising European association, and together with you, we can develop a new concept of data infrastructure ecosystem based on the values of openness, transparency, sovereignty, and interoperability. Join us today at Gaia-X and be part of this technological ecosystem. Hello. This is Vasilia Orfanou, CMO of Gaia-X. We are having here today with us a wonderful Stuart Mackintoch, CEO and founder of OpusVL. Good morning, Stuart. How are you?
Good morning. Just fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for your availability today. I know that you have a really busy schedule, so availing 20 to 25 minutes for Gaia-X, I think this is wonderful for our audience. Stuart, if you can take me a little bit through your experience, where it all started, your experience, your expertise, just give me a couple of details about your background.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess I came originally from electronics and into computers in the 90s. And after various projects in communications, I moved to open source around 1995. And really, I've been exclusively on free and open source software in everything I've done since then. I set up OpusVL in 1999 with the purpose of bringing open source to organizations in public and private sector. And that's developed over that period. In the health sector, or public sector, maybe for 10, 12 years, working on policy as well as technology. And in the last 7 years or so, around the health sector, which I started by connecting with the NHS, UK NHS open source program. And in recent years, worked quite a lot with the NHS in clinical and non-clinical projects. So non-clinical, such as billing and finance, and clinical projects such as supporting data systems and developing data systems, managing nursing observations, COVID management, screening, sepsis screening, and other such things. And this is really thinking from a systems perspective rather than from an application perspective.
Stuart, obviously you've been working for the health sector. It could have been a different sector, but you've chosen to dedicate yourself into this direction. So I presume that you obviously wish to equally create more social impact and, let's say, reinvent the sector or even improve how the sector is currently handled. How do you believe Gaia-X can support or facilitate, let's put it this way, in this direction?
So you're right. I'm interested in this sector. I am a customer as well as a contributor and a stakeholder. So I have, as most of us are, we have several roles in this sector. What Gaia-X can do? Well, the design of Gaia-X, the standards-based approach on a kind of continental and of course international scale, enables the opportunity to build applications that can be consumed across a much wider marketplace without necessarily some of the commercial barriers that otherwise might be there, without some of the lock-ins or some of the cloud-based lock-in, and the ability, because of this open source nature from the start, the values of Gaia-X with the open standards and open source and the general open approach, that enables a lot more collaboration. So it's the opportunity there is to create some significant scale of very valuable applications, which are not only going to be safe, but flexible and appropriate for the users as well. So there's a significant opportunity that Gaia-X creates across this space.
Let me ask you the following. In terms of your vision, obviously in your company, you're currently building a series of products that would further enable health. If you can take me through a little bit what you're currently building and how this is associated with Gaia-X, or how Gaia-X can further enable what you do, what we would say to our audience.
Okay, so we're trying to build as little as we can in some respects, because a lot of the tech is already there. One key component is the way data is stored. So I'll touch on that. I'll explain a little bit about one of the key components of a healthcare system, and that is the let's say the filing system. So many databases are designed to be very easy to write, and even systems, if we come away from the technology, are very easy to put things in. Like it's very easy to put letters through a letterbox. The trick is, once they're in, how do you file them so that you can always get the very right bit of data and the context around how the data was collected at the right point across any care setting for any reason? Because healthcare conditions don't necessarily care about where your last appointment was or what region you're in. If they happen, they happen. And sometimes they're planned, sometimes they're unplanned. And then if you go to the mental health arena, they can be even more complicated because physical conditions can manifest when there was no previous sign of them. And of course, the treating of mental health conditions is a different set of challenges to physical health. So it's the underlying data is quite complex, and it's really important to make sure things are filed correctly. From the research, we ran a 2-year project funded by Innovate UK from 2018 to 2020, and that was significantly funded and allowed us to spend a lot of time evaluating what is the best option for data storage. Because if that's not right, it kind of doesn't matter about the apps too much, because they're never going to really give you everything you need if you haven't got this data model right. We were aware, and we'd used a standard called OpenAir. I say OpenAir, it's written OpenEHR, but it's pronounced OpenAir. Now that is a standard, it's an ISO standard. And what it provides is a community-based approach to the definition of each clinical fact, or the standard of storing of each clinical fact. One example could be blood pressure. It could be recorded as a couple of numbers, but depending on the context and depending on the place it was recorded and why it was recorded, it could be perceived in different ways. And it's not always just as simple as that. So you need some more information around that recording, as you do allergies. If you have an allergy to penicillin, it's useful to know the context, whether that was a clinical test to scientifically evidence that you were allergic to it, or that you turned up in A&E in a bit of a state and someone said, "Are you allergic?" And you said, "I don't know, I can't remember." And you get a different type of recording. So all of these things every single piece of data is crucially important, and there are a lot of facts. The human has a lot of data that could be relevant to healthcare. And then the other thing about this, we're talking about healthcare, but a lot of this data is far wider than the point of treatment. A lot of this data relates to before your life started. So genetics, some of it relates to the episodes of care during your life, and some of it could even relate after it, relating maybe to any organs you may have donated, or even genetics for your children. So there's a lot of different aspects to this. Data is for life. Often clinical systems aren't for life, they're for procurement cycles, which isn't always best for the patient. So considering this set of challenges, OpenAir as a standard allows the semantic specification of all this of the data, so it can be filed away in a very precise way, that we know the context, we know why, when, how, who. The detail of how that is stored is designed by a community of professionals. So there may be 2 or 3 or 10 professionals who will examine that fact and come to a consensus as to what it should be. And if that later changes because of advances in understanding or science medication, then it can be revisioned as well. So each fact has version numbers, and a different group of people may come along and through the community come to consensus that needs to change. So it's highly managed. It sounds quite onerous, but once you've got it right, you've got it right, and it's far better than any other way of storing this data when it comes to digital engineers building applications on top. And I can talk about that in a moment. So this is a critical part of healthcare. OpenAir is adopted in many places. It's one of the largest healthcare opportunities that just isn't really understood. But there's nations. Norway has a national commitment to it. Other Nordic areas, Moscow, use it for their systems. In the UK, the devolved nations have made commitments for national data platforms based on open air. And there's many more organizations, NHS trusts, European organizations and institutes who are investing in understanding not only the standard, but how to implement the standard, the technology that you can use the standard within, and then the applications that can make then valuable use of that. Our applications are sitting on top of that to bring this value out to the developers so they can build things. And the Gaia-X is the opportunity really to implement these pieces of technology and standards, which again, once you've got a standard way of doing health records, you could write an app in Germany and use it in Ireland quite easily because the data is the same. It's just a translation difference.
Stuart, let me ask you something. In terms of the current challenges that we have, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, I understand that we have much more challenges, many more challenges than before. How is the product that you're building ameliorating the current challenges that we have on one hand side? Is it about the lack of standardization that creates further issues? The fact that we have fragmentation of how health data is actually being used, the fact that there is no strategy across the system, for instance, and how data are in fact delivered. Where do you see, let's say, the biggest challenges during and post-pandemic, and where do you actually see the application of your product and obviously Gaia-X as a result?
Well, I would say that this has an impact across all of the points you've made. So one of the key issues is that the current economic model of the providers is not necessarily aligned. This isn't every case, but in many cases is not aligned to the needs of the nation. So economically, it's beneficial to have data put in silos for the person who's selling the silos. So there is that kind of economic disincentive. And again, it's not absolute. There are providers who are absolutely committed to another way, but also some who aren't. So we end up with fragmentation as a result of, in some respects, the customer not always knowing what they can expect for to buy something that is a nice feature, but doesn't consider the interoperability of other systems, and again, lack of standardization. Post-pandemic, I should mention that, for example, pandemic and COVID, within, I think, the first few weeks of the pandemic, it was the system that I'm describing, the database, was able to manage the COVID data in a standard way. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough people to understand that to allow that to be adopted. Otherwise, the European COVID data would have been standardized very rapidly. So there are opportunities for standardization that the pandemic has really illustrated when you have to move fast and you don't have the opportunity to work on some of the slower existing cycles and models. So yeah, we absolutely, this addresses that. Now, again, Gaia-X, if we look at open air as a standard and we look at how it's implemented, there's various technologies that operate it. If we had a situation where that became standardized in policy across the Eurozone, across the European Commission area, then that means that health records could be truly portable. You can consider them privacy, security, and portability. It means that you can have an app from anywhere, just like the trains. Look at the trains across Europe. You can now go from any city to any city, and that's because they're on the same tracks. That is the model that we're looking for. It's a national grid. It's a national network of data. And the things like, is it secure? Is it safe? They need to be considered, but they're a different layer, not by obscurity, it's not by locking them down that you make them safe. It's different layers. And Gaia-X, this is analogous. The approach to this healthcare data is absolutely analogous to the way that Gaia-X has been broken down into subcomponents to be very clear about what each piece does. So the two work very nicely together. And again, this would enable anyone who's on Gaia-X to create applications using these healthcare standards, this clinical data standard, let's say, and that breaks down those key issues that you've talked about.
Stuart, on a final note, in order to decide on certain aspects, we need to mediate between what the policymakers are trying to achieve, but equally try to pragmatically see how certain applications could in fact be used in the commercial sector. In other words, in order to create more of a streamlined approach, we need to mediate between what the policymakers are saying and on the other side what the market demand is. From your perspective, and given that you've held roles between the two in the past, how do you think that this situation can be mediated for the greater social impact and good for the greater community? Let's put it this way.
So I would start with there does need to be some strength in policy here, and there does need to be a respect for the innovative and creative industry. Open source, open standards, open approach thrives on challenges and creativity. It can react very well. So I think by creating some stringent policy rules around, for example, data, whose data is it? Making sure that there is not the opportunity to lock in data that relates to the clinical safety and the livelihood of citizens must be a start. And actually, I would recommend that as a very strong policy around that, to not tolerate providers who come along and say, well, here's our system for your hospital, but you can't access the data. It's that should not be an option. That's where I go with policy. The industry will catch up. Yes, of course, there'll be pushback because there's existing investments in technology. But to make change, the policy, I think, has to lead here, given that it's possible for this to happen. And there's enough case studies and examples to get into that. Then you can start looking at, once you have a standardized data, you're really lifting up the level. We're raising the whole level up. So we're not kind of competing on who's got access to the data and I've got the data or you've got the data, and the kind of lower level, which was 2 decades ago problem. We bring a new challenge. We raise the challenge to say, given that the data is there, it's secure, it's private, and it's standardized and it's common, who can create the best applications? Who can create the best way of providing this data to the nurse, to the consultant, to the surgeon, to the citizen who's at home when they want to access their own records or even input from their smart device or if they're being cared for in the community. So we need to raise that level up rather than some of this commodity where the battles are now into a new layer. And Gaia-X can bring that with this common standardized technology and having that, again, commoditized across Gaia-X, then you've just changed the place where people are then competing, creating and collaborating.
Stuart, and as a final note, when I first started with Gaia-X, the reason that I started in the first place is that I saw that Gaia-X can bring an opportunity for more transparency and openness into the field where it's very much needed, because the current situation is kind of, let's say, monitored or run by hyperscalers. What is your opinion if you were to put, let's say, some of the keywords that Gaia-X brings? I say transparency and openness would be key. Which would be your take?
Well, I certainly agree. Transparency and openness and everything that I'm interested in covers those. I don't believe there's value in lock-in. There's value in the creativity and innovation. So I think what Gaia-X enables is this innovation. It enables greater collaboration, the opportunity to have more portability, is there as well. So wider markets for people who are creating, again, on a standards basis. We don't have to, instead of having 10 systems built for 10 states, you can have one system built for 10 states, but then another 9 different systems. So the overall value offering is by magnitude larger. So there's a lot of value there. I see new commercial models. If you consider the tech shortage, and there has been a significant drain of skills because people have been consumers, not creators. Gaia-X allows for new ecosystems, new commercial models for people to create, develop, and then again create very purpose-specific solutions in an economically viable fashion. So yeah, there's huge economics benefits, skills benefits, as well as these values of transparency, openness, and overall in the health sector, of course it's about improving patient outcomes. This enables patient outcomes to be improved by commoditizing some of what has been specialist applications or applications built for different continents who use different healthcare systems, which aren't necessarily appropriate for the systems within Europe.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Stuart. It has been such a pleasure having us with us in one of our Gaia-X episodes. We would like to extend a warm invitation for the next series. We would like to hear more from you. We would like to engage our community and inform them of exactly what you do on this. We see a very wide applicability across the health sector, and we really much appreciate that your take brings not only the commercial, let's say, product line sector, but it also brings a very wide understanding on how the health sector could further be enabled by using Gaia-X. So thank you very much for your time. Pleasure to have you with us. Let's soon start another series of discussions with you when you have the chance.
My pleasure. You're quite welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.